Good morning to you. I have the privilege of presenting to you something related to the holistic worldview analysis. I hope this is not coming through. So I'll be sharing something about the holistic worldview analysis, as was just mentioned. Thank you, Jason, for that excellent presentation on measuring holistic impact. So I'll be talking to you a little bit about the holistic worldview analysis. And for those of you who've been through a CHE training program, the TOT1, and have had access to all of the lesson plans, the 5,000 plus lesson plans that are there, there is one called holistic worldview analysis, and it leans heavily in using a tool called the 10-seat technique. So immediately after I make my first presentation, we're going to look at some of these things. And we will do a little exercise by ourselves in small groups to actually get some practical experience. So a lot of the things I'll be talking about as I present will be first survival strategies. What is a survival strategy? I'll be talking about the HWVA. If you look at early literature on this, it was WWVA, using, instead of holistic was spelt with a W in those days. And that's been through a lot of, discussion, because some people were still hanging on to the holistic and saying holistic, trying to make the deed part also sort of only about the word part. We'll be talking about how do we respond to a survival strategy, and we'll be talking about what is integral mission, which is sharing the good news through word and deed. Now, different organizations call it different things. For example, some call it holistic development, some call it transformational development. So different organizations use that. It all means the same thing, holistic or integral mission. So to get to that, I want to talk to you briefly about a survival strategy. Now, when I was back in school, we had a guy called Rusi Surti. And he was famous. Whenever you said anything that was unusual, he would say, define it. He often got into trouble because he once during the school social tagged, during the dance, he tagged one of the sort of tough guys in school and danced with his girlfriend. And so that guy said, because you did that, I'm going to break your nose. And Rusi Surti said, define break. And that's how he got a crooked nose. So I'm going to ask you to indulge me a little bit. And when I come up with something that's unusual, will you please together just say, define that, okay? Can we try it? Can we try that? So I'm going to talk to you about survival strategy. Thank you. Glad you asked. So what is a survival strategy? The definition of a survival strategy is what a community does to survive is the survival strategy of that community. And essentially, it is composed of 4 S's, easy to remember, 4 S's. The first is a stock of resources. You need resources, physical resources to do something. So it could be land, it could be trees, it could be animals, it could be a water source, it could be places where they do their cultivation, it could be places where they stay. So these are resources. Without resources, it's difficult to have a survival strategy. So that's the basic component, the first one. But the second component, and it immediately transitions from actual physical material to the second thing, which is the skills. The skills are a little different. Now, just having land is not enough. You need to know how to cultivate it. You need how to work that land. You need to know how to do agriculture. So you need skills to take the resources and combine the skills with it to result in a survival strategy. The third thing is those skills and those resources, how they are used is determined by the people who exist in that community. So that community has to have ownership for it, has to have value for it, has to have appreciation for it. So if that community knows what it's trying to do by using the physical material and their skills together, that is what we call the third S, the stakeholders' intention. And for a long time, a survival strategy continues with these three in combination. That is, provided the resources are lots, provided the number of people are less, and provided the stakeholder strategy for bringing these two together was viable. If it wasn't, that community will slowly disintegrate and migrate out in search of some other option. And oftentimes, it is at this stage that they add their fourth S. And the fourth S is the supernatural. So in a community's evolution of a survival strategy, it adds various components, starting with the physical, then the skills, and then their own planning and how it will go together as stakeholders. And when it doesn't happen, then they add the fourth S, which is the supernatural. Now, as far as a community is concerned, when you go into the developing world, it is a natural continuum. We did this, we tried to do this, and then we put together various efforts to make it happen, and then it was still not working, so we drew the supernatural into it. So you see this emerging pattern of holism in a community. It has a physical component, it has a skill component, it has a planning component, and it has a supernatural component. Now, quick explanation here. The spiritual is supernatural, but the supernatural is not necessarily spiritual. So when we talk about holism in a community, it doesn't matter to them. The supernatural could be anything that works. Just as if I couldn't do a thing in my survival strategy, I would accept help from someone else. In that same way, with that same concern, they would imbibe the supernatural. So they don't differentiate whether it's from God or not. They will add it. That's why witchcraft becomes a part of the holistic component of some community. As Christians, when we talk about holism, we are not talking about that holism. We are talking about the empirical, which is the physical, and the spiritual. Whereas in developing communities, they don't care about that. If it works, it's God. They have what we call a utilitarian view of God. If it works, it's God. Okay? So let's remember that as we move forward. A survival strategy fulfills 6 conditions. Okay? So the first one, a survival strategy if a community has, then it is physically possible. But when they start doing things that are not physically possible, like, having 3 jobs, that's where it get the first indicator that the survival strategy was shaky. It wasn't viable. The second component it has is socially acceptable. The survival strategy would be socially acceptable. If they're doing things that are not socially acceptable, for instance, the mothers determined that one way of income is to sell their daughters into prostitution, it's not a socially acceptable thing. If you find a Jewish community rearing pigs, it's not a socially acceptable thing. Or a Muslim community doing pig rearing, then there's something wrong. So they're doing socially unacceptable things because they had no other option. Number 3, it is environmentally sustainable. You know, we kid ourselves that only we know about environmental sustainability. And communities will tell you that. We know if we cut down this tree, it's going to affect the rainfall, and we could slowly destroy our environment. It's going to affect us on the long run. And they'll tell you, but for today, I don't have anything to survive. So this is an option I choose. That is something that is not environmentally sustainable. They do some things that are economically viable, because a good, healthy survival strategy must be economically viable. What you put in must bring out far more in value than what you put in. But they do it. They're putting as much in as they get out. So it's a ridiculous combination. No return on investment. Yet they do it because the survival strategy was not viable. Technically feasible. You go and look at outdated technology that people are using, and you wonder, why are they using this thing? Because the survival strategy has become shaky. And finally, doing things that are not politically palatable. Why do they smuggle things across? Why do they cross borders? Because their survival strategy is shaky. Let's move on. We're going to look at, in our group exercise, we will visit a place called Duars. This is in northeast India. And we will do an analysis of that community, but I'm going to show you a little bit about that community. It's in the tea gardens in this is where you get your Darjeeling tea, for those of you who've tasted Darjeeling tea. And it's a tea plantation, and we'll be looking a little bit more on it. But here is a worldview analysis. So the question was, sorry, you guys forgot. Define, can we try that again? Define worldview analysis. Okay, so a worldview analysis is a diagrammatic representation and analysis of the survival strategy. Okay, so this here example is a diagrammatic representation of the survival strategy of this community in Darjeeling. Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick explanation, and then when we do the small group activity, you will get to actually experience this. You will use the 10-seat technique. You will get to mark out a sheet. You'll work in a small group. And we have volunteers here who will come around and bring you the papers. But let me just get through a little bit of this. So in terms of, this is a worldview analysis. So this is what it looks like. 3 concentric circles, a section for each one of those areas that you see, the sections of the pie. Those are different areas of activity that the community does for its survival. And when we do the small group activity, it'll become a lot clearer. Okay, so just trust me on this as we go to the next step, and we'll come back and we'll do more details on this. So that's a survival strategy. The innermost circle, and this has a strong correlation with what Jason just presented. He talked about the individual component, the dependence on outsiders component, and the supernatural or the outer frame. So the innermost circle is what the community controls. The second outer circle is what they depend on outsiders. And the outermost circle is what is completely outside of their control. Now, the interesting thing with communities is they do not leave anything out of their control. They want to have somebody take care of it, even if it's a god or a spirit or a dead ancestor. And together, that becomes its holistic survival strategy. Okay? So we're going to look at this, just a few things on a section. Each section of the pie has a part which is what they control, a part which they depend on outsiders, and a part that is completely outside of their control. So you can see in one of those there, all the seeds, and there are 10 seeds. So you're going to be practicing how to do that. The 10 seeds are in the outermost circle. That means this is completely outside of our control. So we let that God or the Spirit or the witch doctor or whoever handle that. We'll go about doing the things that we can control. Okay? So that's an example of a survival strategy. We got the background from the Darjeeling area just to make it a little more impressive. But I want you to take a look at this. And I'm going to read it out, so follow this as it's being read. It's also on the screen. And it's called the God gap. And you'll notice that the word God is using a small g instead of a big G. If you read in the Bible, you'll always have any reference to God using a uppercase. But this is the small g, which is the bunch of little gods and spirits that are in the community. So let me read this, and if you will follow along with me. This comes from a quote from the feast of Peter and Paul the Apostles. It was written by a guy called Richard Trench way back in the 18th century. So that's why the language is kind of outdated. But it has a lot of meaning. So let me read that out. No man can be without his God. If he have not the true God to bless and sustain him, he will have some false god to delude and betray him. The psalmist knew this, and therefore he joined so closely the forgetting the name of God and holding up our hands to some strange god. For every man has something in which he hopes, on which he leans, to which he retreats and retires, with which he fills up his thoughts in empty spaces of time. When he is alone, when he lies sleepless on his bed, when he is not pressed with other thoughts, to which he betakes himself in sorrow or trouble, as that from which he shall draw comfort and strength, his fortress, his citadel, his defense. And has not this a good right to be called his God? Man was made to lean on the Creator. But if not on him, then he leans on the creature in one shape or another. The ivy cannot grow alone. It must twine round some support or the other. If not the goodly oak, then the ragged thorn. Round any dead stick whatever, rather than have no stay or support at all. It is even so with the heart and the affections of man. If they do not twine around God, they must twine around some meaner thing. Isn't that so powerful? Isn't that so powerful? How the place of God emerges in communities. And when they are seeking, if there is nobody to point them to the true God, they will forge gods in their own imagination, out of wood and stone, something they can see and be tangibly drawn to. Didn't the Israelites do that when Moses was away on the mount? And they said, "Come, let us make unto us gods of gold and silver, for we know not where this Moses has gone." So that's how it emerges in a survival strategy. So when you go into a community, it is important to know how that survival strategy emerged and how it was concocted. Because if you do not understand that, everything that you do will be misunderstood, because the holistic worldview analysis gives you a framework for holistic mission, holistic addressing of the needs of that community. Okay, so I will move on and talk about how do you respond to this. So I have a few minutes more, so let me just give you a quick snapshot on this. So you do a worldview analysis to understand the survival strategy of the community, and then after you do the diagnosis of what the survival strategy is, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses, then you have a determined response plan to that. Now, I won't go too much into this. I'm just showing you some of the principles that are involved with. The involvement of a response plan is called the W3P7 strategy. Why is it called the W3P7 strategy? Yes, thank you that you asked. Okay, so the W3P7 strategy, if you look at some of the early literature on this, even at Cape Town in 2010 when we shared this with a large audience, it was known as the W3P5 strategy. So at this time it's W3P7. I don't know if there will be additions to it as we go along. So let's start with, since you asked what the W3P7 strategy is, the W3 are the three W's. Works, in response to what you diagnose from the survival strategy. Word, that is appropriate to the needs and gaps. We saw in that definition that if someone finds something missing, they will make a deity or forge a god in their imagination to fill the gap. So, works in response to the needs of the community, words that link to the gaps. And the third W is wonders, and that's not our responsibility. God shows up in a powerful and mighty way, because holistic mission is sharing the good news through word and through deed. Okay, so that's the W3. So let's look at the P7. What are the P7 things? The first one is strategic prayer for the area. Strategic prayer for the area. Pray for that area even before you go in there to work. This is spiritual ministry. If you see your strategy and engagement in a community as being just taking care of physical needs, you're mistaken, because the community already perceives, and they will ask you, just like that Samaritan woman asked Jesus, you tell me that you can give me water. You don't even have anything to draw the water. And what did he say? If you knew who it was who is asking you, you would ask of him spiritual water. Water that will flow from you, and you will not need to keep being thirsty again. And what was her response? Are you greater than our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well? It's already covered. Jacob has taken care of this. Who are you? Are you greater than him? And that is the challenge that's going to come. So really speaking, it's only Christians who have the right to talk about development work. And I'm talking program development work. So the second thing is the presence of God's people on the ground. You know, this beautiful promise in Psalm 125:3. But it's preceded by this promise that as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. And then it goes on to say, the scepter of the wicked will not prevail over the land allocated to the righteous, so that they may not turn their hand to evil. So just our very presence as God's followers in a community brings transformation in that community. Presence of God's people on the ground. The third is pray for healing of the land. You remember that promise to Solomon, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek forgiveness, I will hear their prayers, I will forgive their sins and heal their land. So even as we walk through that community, are we praying that God will bring healing to the land? Because when Adam and Eve sinned, the land was cursed. And nature itself, we are told, travails and awaits the revelation of the sons and daughters of God. Are we asking for that to happen? Nature is waiting for us to make that request, because the one who cursed is the one who can remove the curse. And we as his children have the right to ask for that. Number 4, implement a plan of action to respond that is appropriate for the needs of the community. Don't go in with your pet plans and your pet programs that don't link at all with what their survival strategy is. Oh, but we have a great education program, but that's not what they're asking for. But what are we going to do with all this funding we have for education program? And so we're implementing and pushing on to people things that they haven't even asked for. Number 5, when you start working in that community, when the work and the word is appropriate and God begins to act, the powers of darkness will start interacting. And that's when we need to confront those powers. Number 6, partnering with the church. The church is not our subcontractor. And having worked in mega organizations, I realized that big mistake we often made. We looked at the church as a subcontractor. Let us outsource to them to do it. No, the church is his bride. And I ask the men here, if someone insulted your bride, even of 30, 40, 50 years, there would be someone to confront, and that'll be you. How dare you treat my bride like that? And we dare to do it with his church. The church is his bride. And we treat her like a subcontractor. Partner with the church. Let the name of the church be lifted up there so that Christ is glorified in everything. The church is his arm for transformation. Number 7, participate with God in what he is doing. We see that in this beautiful promise in Isaiah. And at the end, we'll read that. The promise of transformation, the changes. See what God is doing. That's what Blackaby said. See what God is doing and partner with him. Because it says that so clearly. He is in you to will and do his good pleasure. For he has prepared in advance the good things that you must do. Are we looking to see where God is working to join him? Or are we creating our own thing and saying, God, come and bless this? I want to turn you to one last passage, and then I'm not going to stand between you and your lunch, and our lunch, because I don't want uncertainties, Brother Ricardo, and I don't want my uncertainty to become a problem. So let's just look at this last slide. If you would turn to slide number 38, please, our friends at the back. We're going to slide number 38. Tom and others. Tim, if you can help us at the back there. Slide number 38. Okay, I'm going to read it if you will follow on this. Excellent promise from Isaiah. Isaiah 65 verses 17 to 23, and then I'll close with short prayer, or we'll have Brother Keith come up. Verse 17, Behold, I will create new heavens and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered, nor will they come to mind. But be glad and rejoice forever in what I will create, for I will create Jerusalem to be a delight, and its people a joy. I will rejoice over Jerusalem and take delight in my people. The sound of weeping and crying will be heard in it no more. Can you see that compensation for the evictions and the removals? Never again will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live over his years. He who dies at 100 will be thought a mere youth. He who fails to reach 100 will be considered accursed. They will build houses and dwell in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. No longer will they build houses and others live in them, or plant and others eat. For as the days of a tree, so will be the days of my people. My chosen ones will long enjoy the works of their hands. They will not toil in vain or bear children doomed to misfortune, for there will be a people blessed by the Lord, they and their descendants with them. Before they call, I will answer. While they are still speaking, I will hear. The wolf and the lamb will feed together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. But no change for the serpent. Look at this. But dust will be the serpent's food. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, says the Lord. Let me just close with a word of prayer. Father God, we thank you that even through this quick snapshot exercise, we understood what it means to understand where a community is. Thank you for Che. Thank you for Holistic Mission. Thank you for each one in this room. We ask that you will continue to speak to us and equip us for doing your work in an effective way. In Jesus' name, amen.